This is another episode of Curing Racism. I am your host, Paz Simpson, aka the Happiness Engineer, along with my co host, Mr. Paul Hoyt. Together, we are examining your commonly accepted beliefs that lead to your unconscious behavioral biases. Paul, how are you today, my brother?
I'm doing great. It's been a busy day so far, man. It started early for me, and I've been in meetings all but about 15 minutes the whole day, but always excited to have these podcasts on a Wednesday afternoon.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And it's always a great thing to talk to you, my brother. I want to make sure my phone doesn't go off again. There we go. Because I thought I had my ringer off. So, yeah, there we go. So, Paul, we have been discussing some amazing things, but I think today's topic might be one of the more important topics. The power of music, or the
Power of
power
music.
of, I think, really, to really think about it, it's the power of programming, right? Because whether you're doing it through music, through film, through television, right? Like there's so many messages that are coming at us. But music is the easiest way in order to program the masses.
Yeah, and here's why. And this is one of the fundamental lessons of life is that we learn through our subconscious mind and we learn through our emotions. We look when our emotions are triggered in some way or activated in some way, we learn more deeply. So music, beautiful music, harsh music, tough music, fast music, slow music, you know, communicates energetically to us in ways that words alone do not. So much different listening to somebody speak than it is reading the words on a piece of paper. And it's much different hearing song, and especially song and rhyme with beautiful harmonies and chords and background music, to open up our subconscious mind and let those messages penetrate deep into our souls. So we have a tremendous opportunity with music, and we also have a tremendous responsibility with music. Now, Paz, I think I know enough about your background to know that you probably went to church once or twice when you were a young man.
Yes, sir.
Probably sung a few songs.
Yes, sir.
And that's part of the ritual, certainly in the Christian faith, about great hymns that you repeat and customary hymns and doxologies and hymns that you're used to hearing and hymns that and music that you're used to hearing at weddings and memorial services and because they connect with us emotionally, they connect with our subconscious mind. They have a tremendous potential to impact our behaviors, our mindset, our attitudes.
And I love that you mentioned that because especially in the African American community, like there has been a decrease of influence in the church, right? The church was during the civil rights movement, the church was very much a part of everything that was leading towards change. It was a part of the community, it was a part of, really empowering others. But over the last maybe 20 years, there's been a disconnect between the black person and the black church. So it also takes away the balance that we were hearing as young men, right? So, like you said, I grew up where my mother is still a chaplain. So she still goes to the prisons, she still goes to the hospitals, and she preaches over the sick, the shut in, and those in prison, right? So I we learned a lot of church songs, but I'm also Harlem in the 80s. So being outside, some of the music that we were listening to was a lot different than the music than I was hearing in the church. You know, a great officer said to me one time that we grew up listening to drug dealer music, right? So if you listen to people like Jay Z, who just celebrated his 30th anniversary of his first album, Reasonable Doubt, right? That was drug dealer music. He was talking about selling drugs and how those drugs actually allowed him to propel his lifestyle to become Jay-Z, right? And there were a lot more stories like that, but those stories were actually attainable, right? So what I mean is there were actually people in our neighborhoods that were become, may not have been the best way to become a millionaire, but they were becoming millionaires off of, the drug trade.
Mm.
You know, now the songs that our kids listen to are still drug dealer music, but it doesn't have the same potential, right? Because if you in our community, if you make it to making $50,000 before getting shot or arrested while trying to sell drugs now, you have been lucky.
Wow. Well, I think there is a lot more songs out there available today that encourage hatred, encourage violence, encourage anger, than the ones that I hear that are more peaceful. Yeah, I was my music is grounded in the '60s, where there was a lot of folk music and a lot of you know, when you go to San Francisco, wear flowers in your hair, and Joan Baez and the Kingston Trio and the Eagles, and all of those people. Much different influence than people in different societies today that hear the angry, you got to get those, yeah, yeah. Anyway, you got
Yeah,
to,
I mean, so we have to examine why. First of all, one of the things you'll hear me say is in America, you can't rap about, sing about killing a dog, but you can go platinum and go make millions of dollars killing a nigga,
man,
right? They took 12. Let's take this into context, right? Michael Vick, very famous football player. He was influential, in the style of how football is being played right now, right? Michael Vick played for at that time. I think he was still with the Atlanta Falcons. I don't think it was. Yeah, this is before he went to the Philadelphia Eagles. He was he was he grew up in a community where dog fighting was prevalent,
yeah,
not being educated enough, not understanding the ramifications behind it, because that's what was celebrated in his community. That's how some people, prior to him being a multimillionaire, that's how people made their money to feed their kids, to enrich themselves. He decided to put together a dog fighting ring. He lost his contract, right? He lost. He said he lost $12 million immediately, right? He had to rebuild his reputation. He had to go to therapy. Even when he went and did all of those things, Peter still protested when he got a new contract with the Philadelphia Eagles and began to rebuild his life. There are executives that have made millions and billions of dollars by actually encouraging more violent music, you know, because when you really understand, there is not a black person, and I don't like going in color because we like to erase color, but there's not a black person that actually owns their own record label,
wow,
right? I don't care how big they are, right? Puffy got to realize how much he doesn't own, right? Like I don't care how big the name is in hip hop. I don't care how grand the look is, right? They don't own the actual label, so they don't own the distribution, so they don't get to make the final decision on what's actually going to be played to the masses.
let's let's talk about why angry music can be so popular. And the answer is really very simple, and that is that anger allows us to vent our fear. You know, whenever we have this pent up anxiety and this fear about this, if we can just yell something. Your primal scream therapy is a classic psychological therapeutic technique where you simply just yell and scream into a pillow and you just let it all out. Sometimes you got to let it out to let it go. But the challenge is that sometimes if we let it out too much and we get in the habit of letting it out and letting it out and letting it out, instead of letting it go, it just builds. It just builds and builds and builds within us. So watching one action adventure show, one Jason Statham, one Jack Reacher, one somebody beat the crap out of somebody where the hero ends up in the end, that can be therapeutic because we get that little adrenaline rush. We get to express a little anger. We get to let go of some tension and stress. But if we do that time after time after time after time after time, we end up being somebody who is perpetually hostile, habitually angry and cruel. And it turns out to be a mental disorder, which can be very, very difficult to cure if it ever gets to be cured. So you got to be very careful about the times you allow yourself to be angry and understand the reasons why you're angry and use it as a therapeutic tool as opposed to being a way of life.
I love that you said that. You know, one of the things I tell people is to unplug from the news, right? It's because it is no longer the news of old, right? It's not your news, right? And I say your news because your generation, my mother's generation, actually, there was journalistic integrity, right? There was, uh, to the most part, right? There were standards that was in news. Most people that watch Fox News doesn't understand that they've told you they are an entertainment company.
Right. And it's propaganda. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember back in, when I was a young lad, Walter Cronkite, CBS News commentator, was the most trusted person in America. He was the one that everybody listened to when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I can still remember him saying that in his voice whenever he did that. In 1968, the National Enquirer hit the newsstands, and CBS, with their program 60 Minutes, uh, started sensationalizing news and started combining editorials and news events themselves, and started telling a story about the news instead of just saying the facts of the news. And it has grown and grown and grown since then. And in 1987, Ronald Reagan kicked out the Fairness Doctrine. And then we started having people like Rush Limbaugh and all of the different media activities that are out there that, are really not news. They are entertainment. They are propaganda. They are slanted to help their listeners keep angry. You got to get angry at this son of a bitch. This person's doing that, and this person's doing that. And yeah, you got to get out and vote. But
Yeah,
everybody in the Republican Party is a son of a bitch to somebody, and everybody in the Democratic Party is a son of a bitch to somebody else.
yes. And I told people all the time, right, with the news, they have the opportunity to do two things. They can report good news or they can report bad news. But if you pay attention to a news show, out of that 30 minutes of showtime, 27 minutes will be dedicated to bad news. Most of it, you got that 2 minutes that's dedicated to straight commercial, right? And then if you're lucky, you'll get a good minute of good news,
Amen.
right? So it is important, that we pay attention to the programming. We started talking about music, and the reason we don't want to leave that music, when you're really listening to it, you're chanting, right? Especially music that has drums behind it, right? There's a chant that comes with it. So you want to make sure that the things that you are chanting, right, are actually empowering where you're going, right? There are too many of us that don't understand what we say after we say I am, right? And I am blessed and highly favored. I am so grateful to be here with Paul, right? I pay attention to what I claim after I am, because those are the things that come into existence,
Yeah.
right? So be clear that you don't want to chant anything that doesn't actually feel good, no matter how good it may sound.
And I think companies have figured out the power of music when they play music in your elevator and inspirational music, quieting, healing music in your doctor's offices. When they've got whatever playlist is on track when you go to the grocery store, they figured out how music can impact your mood. And that angry, powerful music doesn't exist in any of those places. You're not going to find it on an elevator. You're not going to find it in a corporate office. You're not going to find it at your grocery store. What you find there is uplifting, encouraging music. Music that will make you optimistic, music that will make you more likely to spend more money because you're in a good mood. So I think we all need to pay attention to that. Pay attention to the songs that we're listening to, the messages of the music, the energy of the music, and for gosh sakes, as a parent, make sure that you are really paying attention to the programming that your children are receiving and making sure that they're getting those deep subconscious, emotionally power packed messages that you want them to receive.
Yes, that is so important. Like I said, the officer said that my generation grew up on drug dealer music. But what he said right now is that our children are listening to drug user music,
Uh-huh.
things that celebrate, the use of depression, being depressed, that celebrate the use of drugs. It's so funny. One of the one of the guys whose name, his rap name is Future, right? So you would think that comes with bright stuff, but one of his most famous songs is Molly Percocet. So and that's all he chants: Molly Percocet, Molly Percocet, and he gets kids thinking like that. Like, you can't survive off of those things, right? You can't win when you're under the influence of those things, and that's what's coming from the future. That's like, when they the the brainwashing of our young men by putting Young Thug in a dress. You change the dynamic of what a thug is, and then you start to confuse the people, right? So confusion is being steadily fed to our babies. So it's important, right? Not only do you listen to what they're listening to, so that you understand what they're listening to, but that you are giving them also great alternatives, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
it's so important because we never know the messaging. Like my, like something so simple. Like my daughters weren't allowed to listen to Beyonce in high school, and then people like, "What are you talking about?" Beyonce has songs like "Single Women," "Single Ladies," but she also has songs like "Watermelon." And if you know what she was singing and she was telling your kids during that song, you would have lost your mind. You
wow.
know, so it's important that you know the words, that you pay attention to the chants, and that you also give great alternatives, because there is still good music out there. You just got to work a little harder to find it. You gotta, you may have to go and listen more to some of the old stuff. You know, the, we were blessed enough. this weekend to have the last poets here on Saturday, and I was just talking to Babatunde a moment before we started here, who's the drummer, right? He's the percussionist, and I got to tell him how grateful I was for him because at first all we had was Abi O'Doon, who's the main poet, 80 years old. I'm like, but the drums made it all made it all right. The drums, connected us all, and the drums allowed the story to really have an impact. And we learned things like where the line "the revolution will not be televised" came from, because they were so older as gentlemen. They remember Gil Scott Heron when he was a freshman in college, right? But they told us the power of the messaging, because the Last Poets was the first recorded poetry group in the United States.
Well,
Before then, poets recorded individually. So
got
to
it.
know that,
So what this has to do with curing racism is really, really make sure that you're not listening to music that in some way disparages the others, that talks about how we all have to get up in arms and go destroy the enemy in some way, that encourages violence, that encourages illegal activities, that does something that really does not help us get along with each other. Because what we really want to do is help people see through those superficial differences that divide us so that we can learn to embrace the common values that unite us. So make sure that the music that you're listening to and that your kids are listening to and that your company is listening to encourages the kind of collaboration, camaraderie, community, and companionship that we all want to see for generations to come.
yes, that is so honest right there. What we listen to will determine how we see others, and how we see others will determine how we treat you.
Love
So
it, man.
that's how we can start to cure racism. So, yes, if you want to have myself or Paul come and really explain curing racism to your company, your organization, if you want us to come and give a keynote speech, if you want us to help you have one conversation that will allow you to move closer to collaboration and really being a more productive organization, please reach out to us at curingracism.com. You can email Paul at Curing Racism or Paz at Curing Racism. Either one of us will be glad to help you. And go back, watch some of our other videos, understand some of the messaging that we've given you already, because together we can make this world a better place. And while you're waiting, grab yourself a copy of the book. That way, you always have a manuscript that you can lean into. When someone asks you, "What kind of race do you belong to?" you can tell them, "God's human divine race." And we're all a part of it.
Love it. Love these conversations on Wednesday. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. Tune in again next Wednesday. Watch some of the other podcasts. Go buy the book. Give us a call. Let us help you help the world by curing racism.